I never thought of myself as someone who needed roommates to feel secure. When I first left community college, I bounced between apartments and part-time jobs, always landing on my feet. But in 2017, Chicago rent was climbing faster than my paycheck at the print shop could keep up with. So when my old classmates Eric and Melissa invited me to split a top-floor brownstone on North Sheffield Avenue, I said yes. David, a guy I knew through them, rounded out the trio. We were young professionals, barely out of school, scraping by but trying to play the part of adults. The brownstone was worn down but charming in its own crooked way. The stairwell smelled faintly of mildew after rain, and the radiators clanked like restless ghosts in winter. But we had space, a tiny deck with a view of the L tracks, and enough room to breathe. Rent was steep, though, so we posted an ad online for a fourth roommate. That's how Clara came into our lives. She seemed harmless enough when she arrived at our interview. 25, art student, messy blonde hair tucked under a knit beanie, clutching a portfolio case like it was armor. Her voice was soft, apologetic. "I just need a quiet place to focus," she said. She admitted her parents had cut her off, but Melissa, who carried her own scars from family rejection, was instantly sympathetic. Clara signed the lease 2 days later. At first, she was quiet to the point of invisibility. She spent hours sketching at the kitchen table, headphones in, as if she lived in another orbit. We welcomed the calm. In a house with 4 adults, silence was a gift. But small cracks appeared quickly. Dishes stacked up in the sink. Ashtrays appeared, even though smoking was forbidden inside. One night, Eric mentioned it, trying to be diplomatic. "Hey, could you maybe crack a window if you're gonna smoke?" Clara didn't blink. She just said, "I don't smoke." That answer stuck with me. Not because she denied it. People lie about smoking all the time. But because her face was utterly blank, like she truly believed her words even as the smell lingered on her clothes. It was the first moment I wondered if Clara was playing a different game than the rest of us. By November, she had a boyfriend, Ryan. He showed up one Friday night without introduction, lanky, hollow-eyed, chewing his fingernails raw. He barely spoke, just flopped on the couch and flipped channels while Clara sat beside him sketching in silence. He unnerved me instantly. One morning I found him in the kitchen staring at a family photo I'd left on the counter. He smirked and said, "You look different in pictures. Softer. Vulnerable." I laughed it off because I didn't know what else to do, but it chilled me. It was the first time I realized Clara hadn't come alone. Things shifted after Ryan became a regular presence. He was never officially living with us, but he was always there. His jacket slung over chairs, his boots by the door, his strange energy seeping into the house. The dynamic we had built with Clara, fragile as it was, collapsed into something harder to navigate. We began losing things. At first, it was little items. A watch David had since high school, a pair of earbuds Eric swore he left on the counter, Melissa's favorite sweater. We teased each other about being scatterbrained, but then Melissa's hairbrush turned up under Clara's bed when she helped her look for a phone charger. Clara laughed, a stiff, robotic laugh, and said she must have borrowed it. Her face stretched into a smile, but her eyes were wrong. The atmosphere grew heavier. Nights were the worst. I'd hear faint scratching sounds from Clara's room like nails dragging against drywall. Melissa once swore she heard whispering through Clara's door, but when she pressed her ear to listen, it stopped instantly. Her sketchbooks, once filled with portraits and abstract shapes, turned darker. Bound figures with hollow eyes, shadowy faces peering around doors. When I asked about them, Clara's only answer was, "Art is supposed to reflect reality." The way she said reality lodged itself in my chest. One December night, the air was sharp with cold, and the L roared outside. I woke to a scraping noise, heavy and deliberate. I cracked my door and found Clara barefoot in the hall, dragging my dresser into the hallway with startling strength. Her eyes were wide, almost feverish. "What the hell are you doing?" I whispered. She froze, then slowly pushed the dresser back inside. "I'm just rearranging." She walked past me as if nothing had happened. I locked my door and sat awake till dawn, adrenaline buzzing under my skin. The next morning, a kitchen knife lay on the floor outside my bedroom door. Nobody admitted leaving it there. That night, Melissa finally confronted her. "Clara, this has to stop. You're scaring us." Clara looked up from her sketchbook, her voice flat as stone. "You'll understand when it happens." From then on, paranoia ruled the house. Eric and I started sleeping with our doors locked. Melissa whispered about moving out, but David reminded us the lease tied us down. Every creak of the radiators felt like a warning. Clara and Ryan were inseparable. Sometimes we'd wake to find him sitting in the living room, TV muted, staring into the dark. Once, I caught him rifling through our mail. When I called him out, he just grinned and said, "Curiosity keeps me alive." I started avoiding the apartment altogether, lingering at the shop or nursing beers at a dive bar until closing. But the fear followed me home. One evening, David pulled me aside, pale and shaken. He had found one of Clara's sketchbook pages tucked into his pillowcase. 3 figures tied to chairs, their faces eerily resembling us. We argued about calling the landlord, even the police. But what could we say? Our roommate draws creepy art and moved a dresser once. It didn't feel like enough. Instead, we agreed to watch each other's backs, a loose pact born of fear. December bled into winter's darkest stretch. Then everything erupted. One night, flashing red and blue lights lit up the street. Police banged on our door, shouting Clara's name. We huddled in the kitchen as officers stormed upstairs. Minutes later, Clara and Ryan were in handcuffs. They had been tied to a string of burglaries across the neighborhood. Electronics, jewelry, personal documents. The stolen items. Many of them were under Clara's bed. She cried as they dragged her down the stairs. But when her eyes met mine, the tears stopped. She smiled, faint and deliberate, like she had known this was coming all along. Relief came slow. For the first time in months, the house was quiet. We packed Clara's things into boxes and shoved them near the door. Melissa joked nervously about burning sage. David blasted music while he cleaned the kitchen, humming like he hadn't in weeks. But relief has a half-life. I couldn't shake the image of Clara's smile as the cops led her away. 2 weeks later, David moved into a new place. He said he needed distance and none of us blamed him. That's when he found the letter. It was slid under his new apartment door, a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a torn page from one of Clara's sketchbooks, 3 figures tied to chairs in a dark basement. Our names scribbled underneath. David called us in a panic. Melissa came over, clutching her phone like a lifeline. We sat on his bare floor staring at the page. The shading, the rope, the blank eyes. It was her hand. There was no question. We reported it to the police, but they shrugged. Clara had already been charged. They said she couldn't contact us directly, but a drawing. No threat they could act on. Still, I taped my windows shut that night. I pushed a chair under my doorknob. My chest tightened whenever the L roared past, as if the noise was a signal I couldn't decipher. I'd always believed fear faded with distance, but Clara taught me the opposite. Sometimes it follows you, silent and patient, like a shadow waiting for the right light. Months passed. Life trudged forward in small, shaky steps. Eric took a new job and left the city. Melissa started therapy and stopped answering texts as often. David changed his number twice. I stayed, though, in Chicago, because running felt like letting Clara win. Sometimes I'd walk by the old brownstone. New tenants had moved in, string lights in the window, laughter spilling out onto the street. I wondered if they ever felt what we felt, that crawling sense of something rotten under the floorboards. I never saw Clara again, though sometimes, when the L screeches past in the dead of night, I swear I hear her voice, whispering that same phrase. You'll understand when it happens. I think about her smile, the knives, the drawings, and I wonder if Clara ever really wanted to be an artist, or if she was just documenting the world as she intended to shape it. We take for granted that the people we let into our homes share our same sense of boundaries and decency. But the truth is darker. Some people carry storms inside them, and when those storms break, they pull everyone in the house into the flood. The lesson isn't to live in fear, but to listen when something feels wrong, to act when small red flags start waving, and to never ignore your instinct when safety is on the line. Because sometimes survival isn't about being brave. It's about knowing when to walk away. I came to Seattle chasing the illusion of a fresh start. Back home in Germany, I had studied hard, worked odd jobs, and told myself that if I pushed through, life would open up. By 2019, I was 27 and had already accumulated debt from studying abroad. My job at a cafe in Capitol Hill barely kept me afloat, and when my hours were cut after the holidays, I found myself staring at rent notices I couldn't possibly cover. Seattle wasn't forgiving. Studios were running close to $1,000 for cramped boxes with peeling paint. I was desperate, scanning Craigslist every night until my eyes burned. That's when I found it. A room on East Pine Street for $375. Too good to be true. The ad was simple. Furnished room, utilities included, female tenant seeking quiet roommate. When I knocked, the woman who answered introduced herself as Elena. She was in her early 30s, tall, her dark hair pulled into a braid so tight it looked painful. Her accent was heavy, Hungarian maybe, though she didn't elaborate. The apartment was stripped bare with only a sagging couch, a single lamp buzzing in the corner, and blinds drawn against the gray light outside. She extended her hand. Her grip was firm enough to make me flinch. "I like quiet," she said. "If you like quiet too, this will work." Her eyes lingered on me in a way that made my chest tighten, but $375 silenced any doubts. I signed on the spot. The first week passed in a blur of relief. Elena was polite but distant. She cooked odd stews that filled the air with thick spices I couldn't name, and she spent most of her time behind her bedroom door, typing on an old laptop that clattered like a machine gun. I figured I'd landed in the ideal setup. A roommate who kept to herself, bills I could actually afford, and a roof that didn't leak. But good deals don't stay good for long. It started small. One evening, Elena knocked on my door, holding a greasy pizza box. "Welcome you," she said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. At first, I thought she was trying to be friendly. We sat on my bed eating slices in silence until she asked, Do you lock your bedroom?" The question startled me. No. Should I?" She tilted her head. "Some people lock doors because they talk in their sleep. Some people give away secrets without knowing it." I laughed nervously. "I don't talk in my sleep." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Good. Secrets stay safest when mouths stay closed." She asked if my family knew where I lived. When I turned the question back on her, she froze. After a long pause, she muttered something about a brother who didn't make it past his 20s. Then she excused herself, leaving the half-eaten pizza behind. From then on, her compliments grew sharper, more unsettling. "You have the posture of a soldier," she said once, staring at me across the kitchen. "Soldiers always survive longest." Another time she studied my hands for so long I tucked them into my pockets. "Almost identical to him," she whispered. I never asked who she meant. By February, the apartment began to feel less like a safe place and more like a stage I couldn't step off. At night, I'd hear high-pitched giggles drifting through the walls, childlike and eerie. The first time I laughed it off, telling myself it was the neighbors. But when I asked Elena about it, she didn't even blink. "Maybe the pipes laugh in this building," she said. "Old pipes do strange things." I started locking my door after that. Seattle winters cut to the bone, the rain a steady whisper against the windows. One stormy night, Elena appeared in the kitchen, her face pale under the flickering light. She poured herself a glass of water and stared at me like she'd been waiting. "My ex thought leaving me would make him safe," she said suddenly. Her voice was calm, almost clinical. "But you can't just walk away from people like me. I tried to keep my tone light. Breakups are hard, I guess. Her eyes fixed on mine, unblinking. Sometimes love needs violence. Otherwise, it isn't real. I stood there frozen, holding my coffee mug like a shield. She walked past me without another word, retreating to her room. The door closed softly and I felt my knees go weak. The following week, I woke to a sound that prickled every nerve in my body. Scraping, steady, and deliberate. Through the narrow crack of my bedroom door, I saw her dragging my dresser away from the wall, her face expressionless, movements purposeful. "What the hell are you doing?" My voice cracked. She looked up slowly. "I'm just rearranging. You'll see." Then she pushed the dresser back into place as though nothing had happened and padded down the hall barefoot. The next morning, a kitchen knife lay neatly on the floor outside my door. When I confronted her later, my voice shook. "Did you put that knife there?" She tilted her head, eyes gleaming. "Maybe you dreamt it. Dreams feel real, don't they?" That was the moment I realized I had to leave. I told her I had to move out for family reasons. My mother was sick, I said. My father needed me. Lies rolled off my tongue because the truth felt too dangerous to speak. She didn't question me. Instead, she hugged me. Her body was rigid, her lips close to my ear. "You'll return," she whispered. They all return. I packed in one frantic night, shoving clothes into garbage bags and abandoning anything too heavy to carry. 2 days later, I dragged my belongings into a dingy studio across town. The place smelled of mold and the plumbing rattled, but I could breathe again. At least I thought I could. The first message came a week later from an unknown number. "I still hear you breathing at night." I stared at the screen until my hands shook. Then another message arrived. "The dresser looks better where I placed it." I changed my number. For a while, the silence tricked me into believing it was over. But fear makes you listen differently. Every knock at the door, every creak in the hallway set my heart racing. Then, at 3:15 one morning, my phone buzzed again. A new number. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. The image was blurry, but unmistakable. It was my new apartment door. Sleep became impossible after that. I pushed a chair under the knob, taped the windows shut, and left the lights burning until dawn. I told myself it was paranoia, that maybe a prankster had snapped the photo. But deep down, I knew. Sometimes I'd pass a tall figure on the street, bundled in a coat, and my stomach would drop. I never saw her face, but I didn't need to. The presence was enough. I thought about going to the police, but what would I say? My old roommate sends me creepy texts and maybe took a picture of my door. Without proof, they'd tell me to block the numbers and move on. Instead, I carried the fear with me. At work, I jumped every time the bell above the cafe door jingled. On the bus, I scanned every seat for her silhouette. At home, I listened to the silence until I thought I could hear her breathing through the walls again. Seattle carried on as if nothing had happened. The city glittered with neon signs, the bars pulsed with music, and the rain kept falling. But my world had shrunk to survival, making it through one day without seeing her face, without hearing her voice whisper in the dark. I don't know if Elena is still out there watching. I only know that cheap rent came at a cost I'm still paying. Sometimes desperation blinds us to danger. We convince ourselves that a bargain is worth the risk, that silence equals safety, that strange behavior can be excused if the rent is low enough. But safety isn't measured in dollars. The people we share walls with shape our lives as much as any lease or paycheck. The lesson is simple, but vital. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it probably is. No discount, no convenience, no false sense of security is worth sacrificing your peace of mind. When I boarded the plane to Denver in the summer of 2015, I thought I was finally putting distance between myself and everything I wanted to forget. The breakup in Prague had gutted me, leaving behind a version of myself I barely recognized. My friends told me Denver was cheaper, friendlier, a place where someone like me could work remotely and slowly put her life back together. I wasn't sure I believed them, but I needed a change, and change felt safer when it was wrapped in miles of distance. I found the townhouse through Craigslist after weeks of panicked searching. The rent was $420 a month, which was absurdly low compared to anything else near Colfax Avenue. I told myself not to question it too much. A lifeline is still a lifeline even if it looks frayed. Natalie Fisher opened the door when I arrived. She was in her early 30s, short blonde hair tucked neatly behind her ears, her posture perfectly straight. "You must be Sophia," she said softly, her voice carrying an accent I couldn't place right away. "Swiss," she explained later. She said she was a part-time caregiver, though she never seemed to leave the house. Inside, the townhouse was unnervingly bare. The curtains were always drawn, blocking out the Colorado sun. The furniture looked mismatched, second-hand, with the only striking feature being a corkboard covering one wall of the living room. It was littered with pinned notes, magazine clippings, and photographs. "My inspiration wall," she called it. I smiled politely but felt an unease I didn't want to name. That first week she was kind in her own quiet way. Every evening she brewed tea, offering me a steaming cup without fail. We talked about travel, about art, about why we had both ended up in this city. I wanted to believe I had stumbled into a peaceful situation after months of chaos. For a little while I let myself believe it, but comfort has a way of wearing thin. And soon, the cracks started to show. It was during one of our tea nights that she said it. We were sitting at the small kitchen table, steam fogging the air between us when she leaned forward. "You twist your hair when you lie. You've done it since childhood, haven't you?" I froze, mid-sip. I didn't remember telling her that. In fact, I wasn't sure I had ever told anyone. "How would you know that?" I asked. She smiled, tilting her head. "Some things are easy to see." After that, I started noticing how much she remembered, what foods I preferred, the way I set my alarm, the songs I hummed while cooking. At first, I brushed it off as harmless observation. Some people are just perceptive, I told myself. But then the texts started. Anonymous numbers, short messages, "Pretty dress today. You hum when you cook spaghetti. The red scarf suits you best." These weren't things strangers on the street could notice. They were private details, visible only within the walls of the townhouse. I wanted to believe it was a prank, some friend messing with me from back home. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. The worst moment came late one night. I walked into the kitchen for a glass of water and found Natalie seated at the table, flipping through a photo album. My photo album. The one I kept locked in my suitcase, filled with old family pictures from Croatia. "What are you doing with that?" My voice rose, trembling. She didn't flinch. "I wanted to know you better," she said calmly, tracing a finger over my father's face in one of the pictures. I yanked the album from her hands and ran back to my room, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep at all that night. After that, things shifted. She began leaving gifts for me. A silk scarf in my favorite color draped across my bed. A bottle of perfume identical to the one my ex had once given me. A sketch taped to my door of me sleeping, my face peaceful, drawn in delicate pencil strokes. I confronted her one evening, scarf in hand. "Did you put this in my room?" Her eyes softened in a way that chilled me more than anger would have. "You don't have to be afraid," she whispered. "I'm the only one who will ever understand you." From that point on, the house never felt silent. I'd hear creaks in the hallway outside my door at night as if someone were pacing. Sometimes I woke to humming. Not just any humming. My humming. The exact tune I often caught myself repeating while cooking, now echoing faintly from her room. I thought about leaving, but where would I go? Rent was crushing me already, and part of me kept second-guessing. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe she was lonely and eccentric, not dangerous. Then I found the scrapbook. It was hidden behind a stack of magazines in the living room. At first glance, it looked harmless. Patterned paper, carefully glued pages. But when I opened it, my blood ran cold. Every page held photoshopped images of my face. My face pasted onto strangers' bodies, Some naked, some tied up, others smiling eerily. Around the edges, words were scrawled in shaky handwriting. Finally together. Forever, even if she runs. I dropped it like it had burned me. I didn't know who else to turn to, so I called my older brother back in Croatia. Over video chat, I showed him the scrapbook. His face darkened instantly. "You need to go to the police right now," he said. "Don't wait, Sophie. This is dangerous." The next morning I did. 2 officers came to the townhouse, their expressions cautious as I explained everything. They flipped through the scrapbook, but Natalie stood in the corner, her face perfectly calm. "She's unstable," Natalie said evenly, pointing at me. "She's imagining things." The officers couldn't charge her with anything. The photos weren't illegal, just disturbing. They warned her to stay away from me, then left. The whole time she stood there watching me, her smile as thin as a razor. I knew I couldn't stay. Within 48 hours, I packed what I could and crashed on a coworker's couch. I left furniture, clothes, even my grandmother's quilt behind. None of it mattered compared to getting out alive. But the escape didn't end the nightmare. A week later, I was in a new apartment, smaller but safer, or so I thought. Then I found the first note slid under my door. "The scarf looks better on you when you sleep." I tore it up, told myself it was coincidence, a sick prank by someone in the building. Then came the second. "Don't try to hide. I've always found you." I stopped sleeping after that. Every sound outside my window, every footstep in the hall made my heart hammer. I thought about calling the police again, but what could I show them? Scraps of paper with handwriting that meant nothing to anyone but me. Denver was alive with summer, music pouring out of bars, the air warm and electric. But my world had shrunk to a single fear. That she was still out there watching, waiting, convinced we were bound together by something only she understood. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake to the sound of humming in the dark. My own humming, carried back to me like a memory that refuses to let go. When you share a home with someone, you're sharing more than walls. You're handing over access to your routines, your habits, your vulnerabilities. It's easy to ignore the warning signs, to convince yourself that eccentric behavior is harmless because moving is hard, or because you don't want to make waves. But safety demands listening to your instincts. When someone crosses boundaries again and again, it isn't eccentricity, it's danger. The moral is simple: trust the unease in your gut. Protecting your peace and safety is worth more than rent, comfort, or convenience. Back in 2012, I was 25 and desperate. I had just landed a job at a small marketing firm in downtown Philadelphia. The pay was barely enough to keep me afloat, and student loans kept nipping at my heels. I knew I couldn't afford my own place, so I did what every broke 20-something did at the time. I scrolled Craigslist, refreshing listings until something cheap popped up. That's how I found 312 Willowbrook Avenue, a narrow row house tucked into a quiet neighborhood. The ad promised a room for $400 a month. It sounded too good to be true, but when you're drowning, you don't question the rope thrown your way. The house belonged to a woman named Kira Vogel. She was 28, from Austria, and the kind of person who seemed to suck the air out of the room the moment you walked in. Her jet black hair was tied in a messy bun, her eyes sharp, her smile thin. "I don't like boring people," she told me during the tour. "If you're boring, don't stay." I laughed nervously. I figured she was joking, though part of me knew she wasn't. The house itself had an unsettling feel. Beige walls, old wood floors that creaked like they were complaining, and a faint chemical smell, bleach maybe, that never seemed to go away. Most of the rooms were sparse, like no one had really lived in them for years. Kira's bedroom door was always locked, but sometimes she left it cracked. I'd catch glimpses of odd details: photographs turned face down, notebooks stacked with military neatness, and a baseball bat leaning against the bed frame. Still, the rent was cheap, and she wasn't openly hostile. For the first few weeks, I told myself it would work out. I had my little bedroom, my job, and the sense that maybe I was finally getting my life on track. But living with Kira was like walking on ice you couldn't see through. Every step felt fine until it suddenly didn't. At first, she was oddly welcoming. Kira cooked late at night, filling the kitchen with the smell of garlic and paprika. Sometimes she'd knock on my door and invite me to join. Over cheap wine, she'd tell stories about Vienna, childhood memories, old friends, strange adventures that didn't always add up. One night she leaned across the table, eyes glinting, and said, "I can read people better than they can read themselves." I wasn't sure if it was confidence or a warning. Her mood shifted without warning. One night she'd laugh loud, almost charming, leaning close as though we were conspirators. The next, she'd slam doors, mutter in German under her breath, and accuse me of staring at her things. I tried to keep my head down, but she had a way of pulling me in. I came home from work one evening to find my bedroom door wide open. My laptop sat on my bed, screen glowing, though I was certain I'd shut it before leaving. "Did you go into my room?" I asked. "Maybe you forgot," she said flatly. "People forget things when they're stressed." Another time I caught her scrolling through my phone on the couch. She didn't look guilty at all. "I just wanted to know who you talked to," she said, smiling faintly. "You don't seem close to your family. That makes us closer, doesn't it?" Her words lingered longer than they should have. I started locking my door whenever I left the house. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more about me than anyone should. Things grew worse when Trevor showed up. Trevor Hansen was Kira's boyfriend, if you could call him that. Early 30s, tall, built like someone who'd spent years in gyms and bars instead of classrooms. Tattoos snaked down his arms, and his eyes always had that restless, mean shine. At first, he didn't say much. He'd lounge in the living room watching TV or drinking beer, smirking whenever I walked past. But his presence filled the house with a weight I couldn't ignore. One night I came home late from work, tired and ready to collapse. The house was dark except for a faint glow from the living room. Trevor sat there in the shadows, waiting. "She says you don't trust her," he whispered, his voice low and almost playful. "That's a dangerous mistake." I didn't answer. I just walked past, heart pounding, locking my bedroom door behind me. After that, Kira began showing up at my door late at night. She'd knock softly and ask questions that made my skin crawl. "Do you ever dream of being trapped? If you disappeared, who would notice first? Would you defend yourself or would you just let it happen?" Her eyes stayed fixed on mine whenever I answered, like she was testing me, like my words mattered less than my reaction. By May, I started sleeping with my door locked every night. Still, I'd wake to faint scratching sounds outside like nails dragging against wood. One morning, after oversleeping, I found a note slipped under the door in messy handwriting. "Don't keep me waiting again." I never saw who left it. The breaking point came in June. I was at my desk when my phone buzzed with a text from Kira. "Fairhill Park, 10 p.m. I need to explain everything. I should have ignored it. Every instinct told me not to go. But curiosity has a way of muting fear, and a part of me worried about what might happen if I didn't show." The park was nearly empty when I arrived. Streetlights flickered, insects buzzing in the muggy air. I sat at the picnic table she'd mentioned, waiting, my nerves stretched thin. 10 minutes passed. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Before I could turn, someone tackled me to the ground. A masked man, heavy and fast. Fists and boots rained down, and I felt the sharp sting of something metallic pressing into my ribs. My wallet, phone, and keys were ripped away. When the man fled, I staggered to my feet, dazed and bleeding. I stumbled to a nearby house where a woman called the police. Officers arrived, asked questions, pieced things together. The attacker wasn't random. It was Trevor. He'd been waiting for me. And Kira? She had given him my schedule, told him where I'd be, even handed over details to make the attack easier. When officers confronted her, she didn't deny it. She looked straight at them and said, watching me, he needed to be reminded of his place. Trevor was arrested. Kira wasn't. When I returned to the house to pack my things, Kira was there. Calm, quiet, as if nothing had happened. She leaned in the doorway while I stuffed clothes into bags, her voice low and steady. "You'll miss me. Nobody ever forgets me." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My hands shook as I zipped the last bag and carried it out. I didn't look back. Within days, I found another apartment across town. It was smaller, more expensive, but it had locks I trusted. I told no one my schedule. I avoided parks, avoided late-night walks, avoided anything that reminded me of that night. But the fear followed me anyway. Every creak of a floorboard, every late knock on a neighbor's door, every shadow lingering too long in the streetlight made my chest tighten. I never saw Kira again, but I never really escaped her either. Years later, I still catch myself double-checking locks, staring too long at strangers' faces, waiting for the familiar chill of recognition. Because Kira was right about one thing: nobody forgets her. Trust is fragile, and sharing a home means sharing pieces of yourself you don't even realize you're giving away. When someone crosses boundaries, it's easy to dismiss it as eccentricity or convince yourself you're overreacting. But ignoring those small warnings lets danger grow unchecked. The lesson is simple. Listen to your instincts, protect your boundaries, and don't stay in a place where fear lives in the walls. Peace of mind will always be worth more than cheap rent. I never thought Houston would be home, not even for a year. After graduating from community college in San Antonio, I figured I'd land something steady, maybe an apprenticeship that would turn into a full-time gig. Instead, by the fall of 2017, I found myself working endless hours at a mechanic shop off Washington Avenue, trying to stretch each paycheck far enough to cover food, gas, and rent. Houston was bigger, louder, and more chaotic than I expected, and though I liked the work, grease under my fingernails, the clank of tools, the satisfaction of fixing engines, I couldn't ignore the emptiness in my checking account. Living alone wasn't an option. I scrolled through forums and rental listings every night, looking for something cheap enough not to drown me. Most of the places were scams, half-finished houses, or too far from downtown to be worth the commute. Then one evening, I found a post on a local housing forum. Room available, 1849 Magnolia Street, $375 a month, utilities included. It seemed too good to be true. I clicked the link and saw a single blurry photo of a duplex with peeling paint, and below it, the name, Akira. I called the number the next day. "Hi, this is Akira," the voice said. Polite, soft, with the faintest trace of something I couldn't place. "Hey, I'm Diego. I saw your listing for the room. Is it still available?" "Yes. You can come by tonight if you like." The duplex sat on a quiet street of sagging porches and cracked sidewalks. It wasn't pretty, but for $375 I didn't expect pretty. Akira answered the door barefoot, wearing paint-stained jeans and a faded white t-shirt. He was tall, maybe mid-20s, with straight black hair that brushed his shoulders. His eyes, dark and steady, lingered on me before he smiled faintly. "You're Diego?" "Yeah," I said. "Come in." Inside, the place smelled faintly of oil paint and turpentine. The furniture was mismatched. A plaid couch, a sagging recliner, but the floors were swept and the kitchen looked clean. On one wall leaned several canvases. I caught glimpses of faces, colors, brushstrokes, but he quickly moved past them. "I'm an artist," he explained. "I work nights at a warehouse. I don't smoke. Rent's due on the 1st. Utilities are included. I like things quiet." The room he showed me was small, just a twin bed and a window overlooking the street, but it was enough. I didn't even haggle. "I'll take it," I said. That night I carried over my boxes of clothes, tools, and the old TV my cousin lent me. I felt lucky, almost relieved, like I'd beaten the odds. For the first couple of weeks, things were fine. Akira and I weren't friends exactly, but we shared late-night meals after our shifts, sitting at the chipped kitchen table with reheated leftovers. He'd ask me about my family, about the shop, about San Antonio. His voice was calm, steady, like he measured every word before letting it go. I didn't know much about him besides the basics. Born in Japan, raised in California, moved to Texas for cheaper rent and more space for his art. He seemed harmless enough. Maybe a little quiet, maybe a little too private, but harmless. Still, every now and then, I'd catch him looking at me a little too long, like he was studying me. At first, I thought it was nothing, just an artist thing. People like that notice details the rest of us ignore. But there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite name. And though I didn't know it then, that look would be the first red flag in a long line of them. By the end of September, the duplex felt less like a place I lived in and more like a stage set. I couldn't explain why. Everything looked normal. The fridge was stocked, the bills were paid, the walls were quiet most of the time, but small things started gnawing at me. The first time I noticed was with my toolbox. I kept it under my bed locked. One night after work I reached for it and found it gone. Panic shot through me. Those tools were my livelihood. I searched the room, the kitchen, even the bathroom. Nothing. 2 days later I found the box sitting neatly in the hallway, every wrench and socket cleaned and arranged in order. "Hey, Akira," I asked at dinner, trying to sound casual. "You see my toolbox?" He looked up from his rice, expression unreadable. "Yes, I borrowed it. I forgot to ask." "You could have told me," I said, half laughing. I put everything back, cleaner than before. His faint smile returned, but it didn't touch his eyes. Another time, my phone charger disappeared. I tore the room apart, irritated, only to find it later in the bathroom sink. I mentioned it, and Akira shrugged. Maybe I borrow things without asking. I forget sometimes. The way he said it, calm and unbothered, made it hard to argue. But something in me started paying closer attention. At night, when I tried to sleep, I often heard him humming, a low, tuneless sound that drifted through the walls. It wasn't music, not really, more like a drone. Sometimes it kept me awake for hours, and once, at 3 a.m, I woke to the sound of footsteps pacing just outside my door. I yanked it open, heart pounding, and found him standing there holding a glass of water. "Couldn't sleep," he muttered, smiling too widely. I closed the door without answering. It wasn't until the day I found his sketchbook that the unease became fear. He left it open on the couch while he showered. At first I only glanced, curious, but what I saw made my stomach tighten. Page after page was filled with my face. Not portraits in the flattering sense, but twisted versions. Me screaming, me with hollow eyes, me bound to a chair. Above one drawing, scrawled in heavy black strokes, were the words, "Soon he will understand." I closed the book fast and shoved it back where it had been. My hands shook the rest of the night. When he came out of the bathroom, damp hair dripping, he caught me staring at the sketchbook. "Do you like them?" he asked softly. I forced a smile. "You're talented." His grin widened, and for the first time I felt real fear bloom in my chest. After that, I kept my distance. I worked longer shifts, hung around the shop after hours, and spent weekends at my cousin's place on the north side. I locked my bedroom door at night and tried to convince myself I was overreacting. People express themselves in strange ways. Maybe he just used me as a model. Maybe the drawings weren't as dark as I thought. But then he noticed. One evening we sat at the kitchen table, silent except for the hum of the fridge. He pushed aside his bowl and looked at me. "You don't trust me," he said. His voice was calm, almost casual, but his eyes were sharp. "What? No, it's not that." "It is. You avoid me. You keep your door locked. That makes me sad. Roommates should trust each other completely." I forced a laugh. "I've just been busy with work." He studied me for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Heavy memories. That inspires me." "You move like someone who carries the words," made my skin crawl. A week later I came home late, exhausted, only to freeze in the doorway. The living room was transformed. The furniture was pushed aside and every wall was covered with canvases. My face stared back at me from every angle. Sleeping, walking, eating, brushing my teeth. Some were half-finished, others disturbingly detailed. On one canvas, the paint was still wet. It showed me sitting at the dinner table, wearing the exact clothes I had on that moment. My breath caught. He had painted me as I walked in. "Do you like it?" His voice came from behind me. I spun around. He stood in the hallway, brush in hand, his eyes glowing with some strange intensity. "I can't. This is too much," I stammered. "You can't keep doing this." "It's not me," he whispered. "It's you. You bring it out. You make me see." I didn't answer. I bolted to my room, locked the door, and called my cousin. "I need you to come get me," I said, voice shaking. That night, I packed everything I could fit into 2 duffel bags and left. 2 days later, I returned with a friend to grab the rest of my things. The duplex was empty, no paintings, no furniture, no sign of Akira. "Dude," my friend muttered, staring at the bare walls. "It's like no one lived here." I searched every room, hoping to at least find some clue, but it was spotless. Too spotless. I left with my boxes and told myself it was over, but it wasn't. A week later, I got a text from an unknown number. "You should have stayed." I blocked it. Then came the package. No return address, just my name scrawled in neat handwriting. Inside was a single canvas, wrapped in brown paper. I tore it open and froze. It showed me standing at a grave, my own name carved on the tombstone. I dropped it, my hands trembling. My friend told me to go to the cops, but what could I say? That my ex-roommate mailed me a painting? That he might be watching? I stored the canvas in the garage and tried not to think about it. But at night, when I closed my eyes, I still saw his smile. Months passed. I moved in with my cousin, picked up extra shifts, and tried to move on. But I never shook the feeling that someone was following me. Sometimes, leaving work, I'd notice a car idling across the street. Sometimes, walking home, I'd hear footsteps that stopped when I turned around. One night, I found another package on the porch. No address, no note. Inside was a sketchbook, every page filled with my face. I didn't open it all the way. I burned it in the backyard. After that, the packages stopped. Slowly, I stopped looking over my shoulder. But the fear never left. Even now, years later, I still wonder where Akira went. Did he move on to another city? Another roommate? Does he still paint faces of people who don't know they're his inspiration? I don't know. Maybe I'll never know. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I swear I hear that low humming again, drifting through the walls. Trust your instincts. We all want to believe people are harmless, that the strange behavior we notice is just quirks or personality. But when your gut tells you something isn't right, you can't afford to ignore it. A cheap rent isn't worth your safety, and politeness isn't worth your peace of mind. Some doors, once opened, let in more than just a roommate. Sometimes they let in something you can't ever fully shut out. I was 21 when I moved into that little house on East Lemon Street in Tempe, Arizona. It was 2018, and I was halfway through my architecture degree at Arizona State. The place wasn't much, just a single-story house with faded stucco walls, a roof that looked like it had been patched together with duct tape, and floors that groaned every time you set foot on them. But for me, it was freedom. No more cramped dorms, no more cafeteria food, no more RAs telling me to quiet down. My roommate was Omar Khalil, a biology major who'd already been renting the place for a year. He was quiet, polite, the kind of guy who spent more time at his desk than anywhere else. We weren't close friends, but we got along. He'd nod when I came home. I'd offer him some pizza when I ordered too much, and sometimes we'd sit in the kitchen talking about school while the swamp cooler rattled away like it was on its last breath. Money was tight. Between tuition, books, and the landlord threatening to raise rent every other month, we barely scraped by. Omar worked part-time at the library. I picked up small drafting gigs, drawing floor plans for contractors who didn't want to pay a licensed architect. Still, we managed. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. I liked the rhythm of our life there. I'd spend long nights sketching, sometimes falling asleep with my head on the desk surrounded by paper and empty coffee mugs. Omar was usually in his room, lamp glowing under the door while he scribbled notes about cells or chemical reactions. The creaky floors were part of the house's personality. Every step announced itself. Sometimes when Omar walked down the hallway for a glass of water, the sound would travel right into my dreams. One night, though, it wasn't Omar. I woke around 3 a.m. to the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. Step, pause, step, pause. At first, I thought Omar was up late, but when I peeked out, the kitchen was dark, empty. I told myself maybe he'd already gone back to his room, but when I finally drifted back to sleep, the image of that empty kitchen lingered. The next morning, over cereal, Omar asked casually, "Why were you walking around last night?" I nearly dropped my spoon. "I thought that was you." We laughed it off, both unsettled. But in the back of my mind, I knew the sound hadn't been a dream. It kept happening. Always around 3 in the morning, always that same rhythm. Step, pause, step, pause. I'd wake with my heart already racing, straining to hear where it was coming from. Sometimes it sounded like the hallway, sometimes the kitchen. Once I swore I heard the fridge door creak open and close, followed by the faint scrape of a chair being dragged. When I mentioned it again, Omar brushed it off. Old house. Wood expands at night. He said it with a shrug, but I noticed he started leaving his desk lamp on when he studied, like he didn't want to sit in the dark anymore. I tried to rationalize it too. Houses make noises. The desert cools down at night, the wood shifts, things settle. But the steps were too even, too measured. It sounded like someone was actually walking. One Friday night I decided to stay up. No sketching, no headphones. Just me on the couch with the lights dimmed, waiting. My phone sat in my lap, flashlight ready. At exactly 3:07 the boards groaned. Step, pause, step, pause. My pulse hammered in my ears. I crept toward the hallway whispering, "Omar." No answer. Omar's door was cracked open, light spilling out. His lamp was on, his notes scattered across the desk, but Omar was slumped forward, asleep. That's when I saw him. A tall man, shoulders broad enough to nearly brush the ceiling, stood in the shadows by Omar's bed. His beard was thick, his eyes glinted in the dim light, and he wasn't moving. Just standing there, watching Omar sleep. My throat went dry. I forced out a hoarse whisper, "Hey!" The man turned his head, slow and deliberate, locking eyes with me for one unbearable second. Then he bolted, darting past me down the hall so fast the air seemed to shift. I shouted, "Omar, wake up!" My voice cracked. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking. By the time Omar stumbled awake, the hallway was empty. We searched the house together, every corner, every closet. Nothing. The only sign was Omar's bedroom window, cracked open just enough to slip through. No forced entry. No footprints in the dust outside. When the police came, they dusted the sill, took notes, and shrugged. "Could have been a homeless guy," one officer said. "Windows are easy. Just keep them locked." Easy for them to say. They hadn't seen the way he stood there, silent and waiting. Omar stopped sleeping in his room after that. We dragged our mattresses into the living room, lined them up side by side, and left the lights on all night. It felt ridiculous, two grown men afraid of creaks in the floorboards, but neither of us argued. For weeks, every sound made us jolt upright. A car backfiring outside, a gust rattling the blinds, the pop of the swamp cooler. Everything felt like him coming back. I couldn't shake the memory of his eyes, the way he'd looked at Omar like he was studying him. I asked Omar one night, "You ever see him before? Around campus or anything?" "No," he said quickly, almost too quickly. Then softer, "But I feel like he's been here before." That stuck with me. The more I thought about it, the more I wondered if we'd been living with small signs all along. The missing food, the chair I swore was out of place, The footsteps. Maybe he'd been coming and going long before we ever caught him. I started checking the windows obsessively, pressing on the locks twice, 3 times. I wedged a chair under the back door handle. Omar stopped studying at night unless I was awake too. We were living like prisoners in our own house. And still at 3 a.m., the footsteps came. Sometimes faint, sometimes so close it felt like they were right outside the living room. We never saw him again. Not fully, but I swear some nights I heard the fridge creak open. The whisper of a chair dragging across the kitchen tile. The sound of breathing just beyond the hallway. By mid-semester, the fear was eating us alive. My grades slipped, my sketches grew shaky and unfocused. Omar's notes turned sloppy, his hands trembling when he held his pen. Neither of us was getting proper sleep. One night, I snapped. Move. We can't keep living like this, I said, pacing the living room. We should, with what money? Omar shot back. His voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it. Can break my lease and find a new place on a library paycheck? You think I knew he was right, but I couldn't accept it. Then what? We just wait until he comes back? Omar rubbed his eyes. Maybe he already has. The silence that followed was worse than the footsteps. We tried everything. Motion lights in the backyard, cheap alarms on the windows, even a baseball bat tucked under the couch. Nothing stopped the sounds. Nothing eased the feeling that he was still out there, maybe even watching us through the thin blinds. Some nights I thought about chasing the footsteps, forcing myself down the hall no matter what I saw. But every time, fear froze me in place. Because what if he wasn't alone? What if he wasn't just standing there next time? The house, once our little sanctuary away from dorm life, had become a trap we couldn't escape. And the footsteps kept reminding us that someone else had claimed it long before we ever did. We survived the semester, but barely. When the lease ended, neither of us hesitated to move out. Omar transferred to a different rental with new roommates closer to campus. I found a tiny studio with walls so thin I could hear my neighbors argue, but at least I knew every sound came from people I could see. On our last night in the Lemon Street house, Omar and I sat in the living room with the lights on, mattresses still on the floor. Neither of us said much. The house groaned around us, familiar as ever, every creak amplified in the silence. At 3:11 a.m., the fridge door creaked open. We both turned, hearts pounding. The kitchen was empty. That was the moment I knew it wasn't just about one man sneaking in through windows. It was about what fear does when it takes root. Even with the house boxed up, our things packed, we were still trapped in the memory of that figure by the bed. When I finally left Tempe for good after graduation, I drove past Lemon Street one last time. The house looked the same as it always had, sun-baked and sagging. But when I glanced at the darkened windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still inside, waiting for the next pair of tenants to laugh off the creaks in the night. Never ignore what feels wrong in your own home. A creak might just be the house settling, but it might also be something else. Something waiting. Locks, alarms, even police reports can't give you peace if you refuse to trust your instincts. Your home should be a place of rest, not a place of dread. And if that dread takes hold, the smartest thing you can do isn't to rationalize it away. It's to leave before the footsteps grow louder. Looking back now, I can't believe how easily Marcos and I let a stranger into our lives. In 2015, we were 20-something kids trying to make rent in a modest, single-story rental on Pepperwood Drive, just west of the Strip in Las Vegas. It wasn't glamorous. 2 bedrooms, creaky ceiling fans, desert-baked stucco walls that trapped the heat. But it was ours. I worked nights as a cashier in a casino off Fremont Street. The shifts were long, mostly mindless, but they kept the bills barely paid. Marcos was the ambitious one, juggling shifts at a strip mall cell phone store while finishing online classes in web design. He had dreams of moving us somewhere better, somewhere quieter than Vegas. But in the meantime, we were drowning. It started when our old roommates, 2 good friends who'd been with us since college, Announced out of nowhere they were moving to California. That left Marcos and me with the full rent. The first night after they left, we sat at the kitchen table surrounded by overdue notices. Marcos rubbed his forehead and muttered, "We can't afford this place alone." "I know," I said, though the words came out heavy. I'd been fighting the idea of bringing in someone new. Strangers didn't just bring money. They brought baggage, habits, and the kind of tension that could turn a home into a trap. Marcos, ever the optimist, said, "We'll find someone decent. Vegas isn't that bad." I wasn't so sure. Still, we posted the ad online. 2 guys in their mid-20s looking for a roommate. Rent cheap, utilities split, no smoking inside. A week later, Rami showed up. He was wiry, maybe early 30s, with darting eyes that didn't seem to focus long on anything. He walked right in like he owned the place, dropped onto the couch without asking, and called me Al before I'd even introduced myself. He talked fast, cracked weird jokes about the neighborhood, and when we explained the rules, quiet after midnight, keep the kitchen clean, he nodded distractedly like he wasn't listening. Marcos shrugged after he left. "He seems fine enough. We need the rent." I wanted to say no, but the weight of the overdue bills pressed harder than my instincts. Against every red flag in my gut, we let him move in. At first it was tolerable. Annoying, but tolerable. Rami left dirty dishes piled in the sink and slammed doors at 2 a.m. He'd disappear for days, then show up smelling like smoke and something chemical I couldn't quite place. Once he brought in strangers at 2 in the morning, laughing and spilling beer in the kitchen while Marcos and I tried to sleep. When I confronted him, he smirked. "Relax, Al. This is Vegas, not Sunday school." I hated the nickname, hated the smirk even more. But Marcos brushed it off. He's not worth it. Don't fight him. Little things started going missing. My favorite mug, one of Marcos's headphones, even a couple of textbooks I needed for a certification exam. Rami mocked me when I asked about them. "Casino boy thinks I'm stealing his homework now?" His grin had no warmth. What bothered me most wasn't the missing stuff. It was the way he sometimes stood in the hallway just staring. No words, no explanation. Just standing there until I finally said, "What?" Then he'd shrug and walk away, as if daring me to keep asking. The nights got worse. I'd come home at dawn after a shift and find him pacing in the living room, muttering under his breath. Once I found him sitting at the table with all the lights off, eyes wide like he'd been waiting for me. He only said, "Couldn't sleep." Marcos still tried to stay optimistic. "He's just weird, not dangerous." But my stomach told me different. The break-in came on a scorching July afternoon. I got home from work and found Rami pacing the living room, hair sticking up, eyes wide. "Someone broke in," he blurted before I even dropped my keys. "Need to call the cops. Took some of our stuff. I froze." "What are you talking about?" "They were in here," he insisted. "Look around, things are missing." I checked every room. Nothing seemed touched, until I noticed my old Nintendo Wii U console gone from the entertainment shelf. A few games too. That was it. Marcos's stuff was still there, my laptop untouched, even the cash we kept in the kitchen drawer. Rami kept repeating himself, rehearsed, too quick. "They took my stuff too. We got a call." His words sounded against my instincts. I let him call. He paced while waiting for the officers, muttering under his breath. When the squad car pulled up, he slipped outside to get some fresh air. That was the last we saw of him. The police searched, took notes, and eventually checked his car, an old dented Corolla parked at the curb. The doors weren't even locked. Inside they found my Wii U, Marcos's missing headphones, and a couple of kitchen knives we hadn't realized were gone. The officer shook his head. "Coming back. Looks like he staged it. We'll file a report, but honestly, he's not relief mixed with dread." If he wasn't coming back, why did my stomach feel like a knot? That night, Marcos and I threw Rami's clothes and trash bags onto the curb and changed the locks. We told ourselves it was over, that he was gone for good. But 2 weeks later, Marcos spotted the Corolla idling across the street at midnight. The headlights were off, but the engine was running. "It's him," Marcos whispered, peeking through the blinds. By the time we called the cops, the car was gone. The following nights, I couldn't sleep. Every time a car slowed on our street, my heart leapt into my throat. I'd imagine the sound of footsteps outside the door, that cocky grin appearing in the shadows. I started double-checking the locks 3-4 times before bed. Marcos tried to calm me. "He's gone, Al. He's just messing with us." But I couldn't shake the image of him standing in the hallway, silent, daring me to react. That wasn't someone who just messed around. That was someone testing boundaries, seeing how far he could push. I realized then that letting him in wasn't just about money. It was about ignoring every instinct I had to keep us safe. Months passed. We never saw him again in person, though once I thought I spotted that Corolla parked behind a strip mall on my way home from work. I didn't stop to check. Life went on. Marcos finished his web design certificate, I picked up extra shifts, and eventually we managed to move to a smaller apartment on the east side. But the shadow of Rami lingered. Every time a stranger answered a roommate ad, I felt the same tightening in my chest. Every knock on the door after dark made me jump. I learned to trust that knot in my stomach, the one I'd ignored when Rami first sat on our couch and called me Al. The truth is, the scariest part wasn't losing my game console, or even seeing him outside in his car. It was realizing how close we'd come to something worse. He wasn't just careless or weird. He was measuring us, how much we'd tolerate, how easily we'd cave. Next time, it might not have stopped at missing electronics. Even now, years later, when a car idles too long on my street, I can't help but glance through the blinds, half expecting to see that crooked grin waiting in the dark. Your instincts are there for a reason. Money problems, convenience, or politeness should never outweigh the gut feeling that something isn't right. A home should be the safest place in the world, and once that safety is compromised, everything changes. If you ever feel that knot in your stomach about someone, listen to it. It's better to struggle a little with bills than to risk inviting danger into your life. When I left the dorms after my first semester of community college, I thought I was finally stepping into real adulthood. No more RAs breathing down my neck. No more cramped rooms with 3 guys stuffed into one space. Just freedom. I was 19, working nights delivering pizza, and I scraped together enough money to split a modest rental on Riverside Drive with a guy I met through a student housing forum. His name was Darius Cole, 20. A library regular who said he needed quiet and cheap rent. It wasn't a palace, but it was ours. 2 bedrooms, thin carpet, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of whoever lived there before us. The AC rattled when it kicked on, and the fridge made a clicking noise like it was about to die, but it was better than the dorms. At first, life was manageable. We weren't best friends, but we weren't enemies either. Darius was messy, leaving dishes stacked in the sink for days. I was loud, clattering through the door after midnight with greasy pizza boxes and tip money. We'd trade tight smiles, sometimes small jabs. You ever heard of soap? Or, some of us actually sleep at night. But we kept it from boiling over. That balance lasted maybe 3 weeks. Then Darius started pacing. He'd pull at the blinds like he was checking something outside. At first I thought it was just nerves, midterms, caffeine, stress. But one night when I came home, he was glued to the front window. "There's a car outside," he muttered. I laughed. "Yeah, people park on the street, man." "No," he said, tugging the blinds wider. "It's been there since I got back." I leaned over. A dark sedan sat across the street, headlights off, a man-shaped silhouette behind the wheel. He wasn't moving, just sitting. "Probably waiting for someone," I said. But the unease had already set in. The car came back the next night, and the one after that. Always in the same spot, always with someone inside. Sometimes the engine idled for hours, sometimes the car just sat dead silent. I joked nervously, trying to lighten the mood. Didn't laugh. He just closed the blinds tighter and muttered, Hey, maybe you've got a secret admirer. Darius, I told you. Someone's watching us. I wanted to believe it was coincidence. Riverside was a busy street. People waited for friends, hooked up for deals, maybe even slept in their cars. But the longer it went on, the more it felt deliberate. The same car, the same shadow behind the glass. Then it escalated. One night, I left for work in my beat-up Toyota Corolla. In the rear view, I spotted headlights pulling out behind me. The same sedan. My stomach clenched. I drove the whole way to the pizza shop with it trailing a few cars back, never passing, never turning. When I finally pulled into the lot, it slowed, then drifted past like nothing had happened. After my shift, I came back around 2 a.m. The sedan was parked 2 houses down from ours, brake lights glowing faintly in the dark. Okay, this is getting weird, I told Darius when I got inside. He shook his head. I told you, he's watching us. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of tires outside made me jump. Darius barely left the house anymore, claiming the car circled when he tried to walk to the store. I thought maybe he was unraveling, maybe this was paranoia feeding paranoia. But then I saw it myself. It was 2 in the morning, a week later. I woke to the sound of gravel crunching. I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. The sedan wasn't across the street anymore. It was parked directly in front of our house, engine running. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would wake Darius. Then the driver's side door opened. A man stepped out. Hood pulled tight, shoulders hunched. He started walking up our driveway. I froze. My mouth went dry. Darius, I whispered harshly. Wake up. He stumbled over, eyes wide, as he crouched beside me at the window. Together we watched the figure stop halfway up the driveway. Then, slowly, he turned his head. His face wasn't visible, but I swear he was looking straight at us. The porch light flicked on automatically. He froze, then pivoted sharply, walking back to the car. Within seconds, the sedan rolled away silently. We called the cops that night. By the time 2 officers showed up, the street was empty. They asked a few questions, checked the driveway with their flashlights, then gave us the same line I'd heard 100 times in crime shows. Probably just a prowler. Keep your doors locked. It wasn't comforting. Darius refused to sleep in his room after that. He dragged his mattress into the living room, begged me to do the same. We set them up side by side, leaving the lights on every night like kids afraid of the dark. I told myself it was temporary, that the man in the car had gotten spooked, that he wouldn't come back. But I couldn't stop watching the windows, couldn't stop listening for the low hum of an idling engine. Weeks passed. The sedan didn't return, or maybe it did and I just wasn't awake to see it. The fear dug in deeper each night. I stopped focusing in class. Darius stopped eating properly. We lived like we were under siege, 2 young guys barricading themselves in a house too small to hide from anything. Then one morning I woke to find his mattress empty. A note sat on the coffee table. I can't take being watched anymore. I'm moving out. He didn't leave a number, didn't leave an address. Just vanished. I stayed. I didn't have much of a choice. Rent was already overdue, and I couldn't afford to break the lease. But the silence after Darius left wasn't peaceful. It was worse. Every night when I came home from delivering pizzas, I'd circle the block twice, scanning for that sedan. Sometimes I thought I saw it 2 streets over, idling with the lights off. Other times I caught glimpses in reflections, dark glass, faint brake lights, a shape hunched behind the wheel. I never saw the hooded man again, not up close. But that didn't mean he wasn't there. Even now, years later, I think about him. Was he watching us specifically? Was it random? Was it Darius he wanted? Or me? I'll never know. But I do know this. He knew where we lived. He knew our routines. He knew how to make us afraid. And he succeeded. Fear thrives in silence. When we convince ourselves not to act, not to push harder for answers, we give fear room to grow. When something feels wrong, don't dismiss it. Document it. Tell others. Press for help. Because ignoring danger doesn't make it go away. Sometimes it just parks outside your house and waits. Growing up in San Diego wasn't easy. My mom worked 2 jobs, and by the time I hit my senior year at Hoover High School in 2014, she had moved out of state for work, leaving me in the care of my grandmother. Our apartment on Fairmount Avenue was small and noisy, wedged between a liquor store and a laundromat that never closed. The walls were so thin I could hear the upstairs neighbors arguing through the night, and the smell of fried food from the taco stand down the street clung to our curtains. Even with all that chaos, my grandmother kept our home steady. She was strict about homework, always asking about my grades, and she reminded me every single day that school was my ticket out of the cycle we were stuck in. I believed her. I wanted that scholarship, wanted to prove to her and to myself that I could do something with my life. Music was my outlet. I played drums in the school band, and whenever life felt too heavy, I lost myself in practice. That spring we had a concert coming up, and I stayed late almost every night rehearsing with the others. By the time everyone left, I'd still be in the music wing running through pieces, my hands blistered but my heart steady. It was one of those late nights that everything changed. The hallways were dark and quiet as I packed up my sticks and snare. It was past 10:45, the janitors had already finished their rounds, and the whole wing felt deserted. As I walked toward the exit, humming under my breath, I noticed the janitor's closet door cracked open. That was odd. It was always locked tight. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone crouched inside. A man, not in uniform, just a hooded sweatshirt and a pale, narrow face peering through the gap. He didn't move, didn't blink. Can I help you?" I asked, voice shaky. No reply. He just shifted slightly, still staring. My stomach dropped. I muttered, "Whatever, man," and tried to shake it off, but the hairs on my arms stood straight. I quickened my pace toward the trophy case near the exit. That's when I heard it. Soft footsteps. Behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped my drum bag. The hallway was empty, just rows of lockers, shadows stretching long under the dim lights. My sneakers squeaked on the floor as I started walking faster, pretending I wasn't scared. I pulled out my phone and texted my best friend Marcus. "Still at school. Think someone's here. Creepy as hell." No reply. At the end of the hall, I reached the exit doors and pushed the metal bar. Locked. My pulse spiked. They weren't supposed to lock until midnight. I rattled the handle again, muttering under my breath when I noticed movement. There he was. A tall, hooded figure stood at the far end of the hallway, completely still. My mouth went dry. "Yo, what's your problem?" My voice cracked. He didn't answer. He tilted his head slowly, like a bird studying prey. Instinct took over. I backed away, then bolted into the locker room, nearly tripping over my drum bag. My hands shook as I fumbled with my phone and called my band director. "Coach, somebody's in the hall," I whispered, my throat tight. "I'm not kidding, he's watching me." On the other end, his voice was groggy. "Hall? Tyrell, slow down. What do you mean someone's in the— he followed me. He's right outside." I hissed but stopped. Boots echoed against the tile. Step, 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 closer. I clutched the phone so hard my knuckles went white. "He's coming," I whispered. Then silence. When my director finally showed up with the night janitor, the hallways were empty. The janitor swore nobody else had been in the building. The police checked the doors and shrugged. Maybe a homeless guy slipped in. Just make sure the place gets locked up earlier. I nodded, but I knew. The way that man stood there, it wasn't random. After that night, I avoided staying late at school, but music was everything to me, and rehearsals didn't end until nearly 9 most nights. Whenever I packed up to leave, my eyes darted to every shadow, every closet door. My friends teased me about it. Marcus said, "You're just jumpy, man." Probably was some dude looking for a warm spot. I wanted to believe him, but in the quiet moments I kept hearing the echo of those boots on the tile. Graduation came, and by the fall I started at San Diego State University. I thought the move would put it all behind me. New city, new dorm, new life. My roommate, Andre Taylor, was easygoing, always joking around, calling me Ty like we'd been friends forever. But even there, in the crowded dorm halls, the unease followed me. Sometimes, late at night, I'd swear I heard the same slow rhythm of footsteps outside our door. I told myself it was just neighbors coming back from parties. Still, I started leaving my desk lamp on when I slept. Andre noticed. Funny. That memory haunted me. Still scared of the dark, Ty? He teased. I laughed it off, but deep down it wasn't. Then one night, it came back in a way I couldn't ignore. I woke at 2:13 a.m. The room was dark except for the faint glow of my lamp. The door was open, and in the doorway stood a shadow. My first thought was Andre, oblivious. Andre, I whispered, but he was snoring. Sprawled across his bed, the figure stepped inside. My chest locked up. I heard the click of the door shutting, then the soft scrape of the lock sliding into place. Panic surged. I scrambled for my phone on the nightstand, but the man lunged forward. I caught just enough of his face in the dim light to know it was him. The same narrow features, the same hood. I shoved hard, breaking free and bolting across the room to Andre's bed, shouted, shaking him awake. Andre jumped up, eyes wide. Someone's in here. Together we rushed back toward the door, but when we flipped on the lights, the room was empty. The window was locked. No sign anyone had been there. Andre looked at me like I was losing it. Bro, are you sure? I saw him, I insisted, voice breaking. He was here. Campus security showed up, took a report, and gave us the same line the cops had before. Maybe a homeless man, maybe a prank. They left us with a warning to keep the windows shut and the doors locked. But I knew better. You don't mistake something like that. Not when it's staring right at you. After that night, I never slept in total darkness again. I kept a lamp on no matter where I lived, no matter how tired it made me. Andre eventually moved out saying I was too jumpy. I didn't blame him. Fear changes people. Years passed, but the memory never faded. Sometimes when I walked across campus late, I'd hear footsteps behind me. Same pace, same silence. I'd spin around and nobody would be there. Even now, long after college, I still wake in the middle of the night certain someone's standing in the doorway. My wife tells me it's just dreams, but I know better. That shadow in the hall wasn't just some random guy looking for shelter. I don't know if he followed me from the school, or if he was always something else, something that found me and never let go. All I know is this. Once you've looked into the eyes of someone who's watching you in the dark, you never forget it. Fear leaves its mark. Sometimes it's not about whether the threat was real or imagined. It's about the way it lingers in your mind, shaping your choices long after the moment has passed. When your instincts tell you something's wrong, trust them. Dismissing fear doesn't make it go away. Facing it, acknowledging it, and protecting yourself, that's what keeps you alive. When you're 22 and already carrying the weight of one failed attempt at college, every choice feels heavier than it should. I dropped out once before, embarrassed my family, and promised myself I'd get it right this time. So when I transferred to a local university in Denver, I swore I'd focus. No more late nights, no more slipping grades, no more excuses. The only problem was money. Tuition ate at my savings, and the part-time job I lined up at a hardware store barely scratched rent. I needed a roommate fast, someone who wouldn't bring chaos into my life. That's why when I met Cole Hammond in the library, it felt like luck. He was tall, soft-spoken, carried himself with an easy smile. He told me he was a history student, didn't drink, didn't party, just wanted a peaceful place to focus. I thought, perfect. That's all I wanted too. We grabbed coffee after, talked about splitting bills, and by the end of the week, Cole moved into the spare bedroom of the 2-bedroom rental I'd found on South Pearl Street. At first, it was everything I hoped for. He paid his share of rent in cash, on time. He kept his side of the apartment neat, washed his dishes, never left laundry in the dryer. If anything, he was too quiet. He spent hours in his room, sometimes whole weekends without emerging except to grab water or use the bathroom. I told my sister over the phone, "This guy might be the easiest roommate I've ever had." And I believed it, until the small things started. It began with the noises. Some nights I'd wake around 2 or 3 in the morning to the sound of running footsteps. Not just creaks, full-on pounding across the living room floor, ending with a door slamming. I'd jump out of bed, check the hall, but every door would be shut. Cole's room always dark and silent. The first time I laughed it off. Old house, thin walls. But when it happened again, I whispered through his door, "Cole, you good?" Silence. Not even a rustle. 2 nights later, I got out of the shower around midnight, towel draped over my shoulders, steam still clinging to me. As I walked back toward my bedroom, I froze. Cole was standing behind my door, pressed against the wall, his eyes wide open, staring. "What are you doing?" I snapped, my voice echoing down the hall. He didn't answer. He just turned slowly and walked back into his room, shutting the door with barely a sound. The next morning, I confronted him over cereal at the kitchen table. "Night. You were in my room. Why?" "Listen, man." Last he looked at me like I was speaking another language. "What are you talking about? I was asleep." "I saw you," I pressed. He tilted his head, gave the faintest smile. "Then maybe you dreamed it." The way he said it made my skin crawl. I started locking my bedroom door at night. At first it gave me peace. But soon, even that wasn't enough. One night I was brushing my teeth when I heard the faint jiggle of my doorknob. I stood in the hall, toothbrush in hand, listening. The knob rattled again, slow, deliberate. I whispered, "Cole?" No answer. Another night, I fell asleep with my headphones in, only to wake at 3 a.m. to find my door cracked open. My stomach dropped. I sat up, and that's when I saw him. Cole was standing in the corner of my room, not moving, not speaking, just standing, his face blank, his eyes reflecting the light from the hallway. I shot out of bed. "Get out!" My voice cracked with fear. He bolted, slamming his own door. I stood there shaking, my heart pounding so hard I thought I'd faint. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed with the lamp on, bag half packed, waiting for the morning. The next day I told him I was leaving for the night, packed a bag, and crashed at a friend's dorm. It felt juvenile, but I needed space. Safety. When I came back the next afternoon, the first thing I noticed was my bedroom light. It was on. I hadn't left it that way. Then I saw the note. A single sheet of notebook paper lay on my pillow. In neat handwriting it said, "You shouldn't lock me out." I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. My first instinct was to run, but I forced myself to grab the paper, shove it in my backpack, and get out. That night I called the landlord, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. He sounded annoyed more than anything. "What's going on now?" I told him everything, how Cole had been in my room, the noises, the note. There was a long pause. Then he said, "Truth is, I never checked his references. He had no rental history, just gave me a recommendation letter I didn't even call on." "Are you kidding me?" I shouted. By the time I begged him to help me get out of the lease, Cole was already gone. His room was stripped bare. No clothes, no books, not even trash in the bin. It was like he'd never lived there. I left that same night. I didn't pack carefully. I just grabbed what I could and stuffed it into my car. Driving away from Pearl Street, I felt like I'd barely escaped something I couldn't name. For weeks I stayed with friends, bouncing between couches while I searched for another place. I told people bits and pieces of the story, but I always stopped short of the truth. Because how do you explain something like that without sounding paranoid? Still, the image stuck with me. Cole standing in the corner of my room, blank face, wide eyes, like he was studying me, waiting. Even now, Years later, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night certain someone's in the room with me. My rational brain says it's stress, it's memory, it's nothing. But my gut whispers otherwise. I never saw Cole again. And part of me is grateful. But another part, the part that still locks my door 3 times before bed, knows he could be out there, watching someone else the way he watched me. Living with strangers can feel like a gamble, but your instincts aren't lies. When someone crosses your boundaries, it's not overreacting to protect yourself. It's survival. Peace of mind and safety should never be sacrificed for convenience, money, or politeness. Because sometimes the danger isn't loud or obvious. Sometimes it waits quietly in the corner. When you're 24 and freshly single, the world feels heavier than it should. That's where I was in 2019, dragging myself through long shifts at a coffee shop off Belmont, trying not to think too much about the breakup that had unraveled the life I thought I was building. Rent on a 2-bedroom apartment on S.E. Hawthorne was more than I could handle alone, but I couldn't stand the thought of crawling back to my parents' place in Salem. I told myself I'd make it work. I posted an ad online, desperate for someone, anyone, who could cover half the bills. That's how I met Devin Price. He showed up with a small duffel bag and a half smile, said he was between jobs and just needed a quiet place for a few months. He handed me his half of the deposit in cash, which felt like a miracle. At first glance, he seemed polite. No weird questions, no complaints about the apartment's drafty windows or the squeaky pipes. I thought maybe I'd lucked out. But almost from the start, something about him felt off. Devin didn't really go anywhere. He didn't cook, didn't watch TV, didn't even seem to own much beyond that duffel. Most nights I'd pass his door and hear nothing. No typing, no music, no sound at all. Once, though, I paused and realized he was whispering. Not on the phone, just whispering to the dark. I told myself it was none of my business. Maybe he was praying. Maybe he was practicing speeches. Maybe I was imagining it. I had too much of my own stress to worry about what my roommate did in his room. But the strangeness didn't stay contained there. It started leaking into my life. The first time I knew something was really wrong, I woke up in the middle of the night to a weight in the room. Not sound, not movement, just that prickling sense of being watched. I blinked and saw him. Devin. Standing at the foot of my bed. Devin? What the hell are you doing? My voice was raw, half asleep, half terrified. He didn't move for a long moment. His face was blank, eyes unblinking. Finally, he whispered, "You left your window unlocked." Then he turned and walked out. I sat frozen for a full minute before I jumped up to check the window. It was shut, locked. I spent the rest of the night wide-eyed under the blanket, telling myself maybe he sleepwalked. The next morning, over coffee, I asked him, "Were you in my room last night?" Devin blinked, then smiled faintly. "No, I don't sleepwalk. Maybe you dreamed it." He said it so calmly that I almost doubted myself. Maybe it was the stress of the breakup. Maybe it was exhaustion. I tried to laugh it off. But deep down, I knew I hadn't dreamed it. After that, little things piled up. I'd wake to find my door cracked open when I knew I'd closed it. Once I came home from work, to a note slipped under the door. "You should lock things tighter. Not everyone is trustworthy." I held the note out to him at dinner. "Did you write this?" Devin stared at me for a long time, then finally said, "Warn you first." His tone was flat. I felt my stomach turn. If I wanted to do something, I wouldn't. I started locking my bedroom door at night. At first it made me feel safer, but soon even that comfort was stolen. I'd wake to the sound of the knob turning slowly, deliberately, like someone testing the lock. I'd sit there, holding my breath, waiting, until finally the pressure stopped. Then I'd hear his footsteps retreat down the hall. Work became unbearable. I'd stumble through my barista shifts on no sleep, snapping at customers, burning milk because my hands were shaking. My manager pulled me aside once. "Everything okay at home?" she asked gently. I wanted to spill everything, but instead I forced a smile and said, "Just tired." Devin never apologized, never acknowledged the tension. He'd sit in the living room sometimes, staring out the window like he was waiting for something. When I tried small talk, asking if he'd had any luck finding work, he'd answer with a shrug, then ask questions about me. "Do you usually leave your curtains open? Do you always come home around the same time?" Questions that felt less like conversation and more like notes being taken. The breaking point came one night when I heard paper sliding across the floor. Another note. This one said, "You're easy to watch." I couldn't ignore it anymore. I confronted him the next morning, fists clenched, voice shaking. "You need to leave." Devin just looked at me with that faint smile. "I told you I wouldn't be here forever." He didn't argue, didn't pack slowly, just gathered his few belongings, if you could even call them that, into the duffel and carried it out. No goodbye, no forwarding address. He was gone before noon. Relief hit me like a wave, but it was mixed with something else. Fear. Because he left too easily, like he had planned it. For a few weeks, the apartment felt lighter. I slept with the door unlocked again. I cooked dinner, watched TV, even invited a coworker over for drinks. I thought maybe I'd overreacted, that Devin had just been socially awkward, that I'd let my paranoia spin out of control. Then the first note appeared. It was under my doormat, "Still not locking your window." I froze on the threshold, the keys shaking in my hand. The notes kept coming. One was taped to my bathroom mirror. "You're easy to watch." Another was left on the kitchen counter, though I was certain I'd locked the door. Each one felt like a blade slipping between my ribs. I begged my landlord to let me break the lease. "Please," I said, nearly in tears. "Knows how to get in." The landlord gave me a hard time, but finally agreed. "It's not safe." I packed up my life into boxes, moved across town into a studio so small I could barely turn around, but at least it was mine. I changed the locks twice, bought a door bar, even shoved a chair under the knob at night. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling he knew where I was. Sometimes I'd wake in the dark, certain someone was standing over me. I'd switch on the light and see nothing but my cluttered desk, my half-folded laundry. But the dread never left. I never saw Devin again. But even now, years later, I catch myself checking the windows 3-4 times before bed. Because once you know someone is capable of watching you that closely, you can never unlearn it. We don't always get to choose who we let into our lives, especially when money or circumstances press us into taking risks. But boundaries are not optional. If someone makes you feel unsafe, trust that feeling. Protect yourself early, even if it feels awkward or inconvenient. Your peace of mind is worth more than rent, and ignoring instincts can cost far more than comfort.